I think that what we've seen, obviously, over the last several years since the beginning of the recession in 2007, we have had, like many other states have had, a struggling economy. But recently, I think we have seen a significant opportunity to be more hopeful about the future, especially in terms of advanced manufacturing, which has been Connecticut's strong suit for many generations, when Connecticut was always seen as a place where there were highly skilled workers working in technical industries. And what we have seen now with the commitment of Electric Boat to hire up to 5,000 people over the next couple of years, and when Sikorsky announced that it was planning to have 25,000 new hires worldwide, of whom 8,000 would be in Connecticut over the next few years, and of course most recently the deal the governor negotiated with Lockheed and rather Pratt & Whitney, 8,000 jobs out of 25,000 worldwide, and then the deal between Lockheed, Sikorsky, and the state to keep them here for the manufacture of the new helicopter, the large transport helicopter. That is critically important, that last one, because while the number of jobs at the end of that will be fairly close to the number that's there now, without that contract for the Stallion helicopter, hiring at Sikorsky was apt to decline significantly over the next several years, because they are coming to near the end of their large-scale production on the Black Hawk helicopter, which has been their staple for many years. And a few years from now, employment would actually have probably dropped to around 5,000 from the 7,800 who are there now. And once that happens, then you would have an underutilized facility that would be in danger potentially of closing and be seen as not being all that productive in terms of the array of properties that Lockheed owns around the country. But by guaranteeing having this contract locked in for long-term production here, we will have 8,000 people continuing to be at working at Sikorsky. And those jobs are really the good-paying jobs that we want to see in our economy, averaging over $90,000 a year per job. And that leads to the point about one of the reasons why we have struggled somewhat in the last few years, is that we have been to some extent victimized by the progressivity of our own tax structure. We have a fairly progressive income tax in which most people pay a blended rate whereby there are exemptions and credits and deductions at the lower end, so that most people with incomes under $40,000 a year wind up not having much state income tax liability. But a lot of the jobs that, of course, were created in the service economy over the last several years have been in that lower paying category. And so although people are employed, the aggregate number of people employed in the state has grown. We haven't seen a concomitant increase in our income tax receipts because of the fact that many of them were in these lower paying jobs. So we are trying to, again, encourage high-tech development through this, as in many other ways. That's why we're promoting higher education at our community technical colleges and technical education as well, and trying to replicate programs in advanced manufacturing, such as those that have begun out at Untitled Community College and other places, to see that Connecticut has always been known as a state with a highly skilled and technically competent workforce, which is what one of the reasons that the management of Sikorsky Lockheed said that was a key point in their decision to remain committed to Connecticut, to have that contract for the new helicopter continue to be built here rather than somewhere else. There was concern, obviously, since four of the prototype helicopters were being built in Florida, there was some concern that Florida might have a leg up in the competition to have them built there. But with Florida, Georgia, Texas, and other states were interested and were competing, but Connecticut won out because of the fact that they recognized that there is a better, more productive workforce here. So I think that underscores the importance of the efforts we've been making in terms of the economy and the way to restore high-paying jobs. Also, we've seen the Republicans were, of course, trying to create a great deal of alarm over the decision by GE to move to Boston. But the reality is, of course, that with GE, only 200 GE jobs went to Boston, 600 remaining in Connecticut, many of them going from Fairfield to Norwalk, but still in Connecticut. And GE's decision really was in the works long before they announced it, up to 3 years before they announced it, and it is part of an overall GE plan to, in effect, rebrand its company as a high-tech digital company that wants to be in a workplace like what they are creating in that area of Boston, with all the synergies that are connected with that. When they came to Connecticut in the 1970s to the suburban campus in Fairfield, that was sort of the cutting edge for corporate movement at that point, and now they're doing sort of the next generation cutting edge thing, which is to go to urban areas like the Southport areas being set up in Boston. In fact, Mr. Inholt, their president, said at one point, he said, "I wanted my engineers to look out a window and not see a deer on a leafy campus, but see some recent MIT graduate with a job that's going to be, or with an idea that's going to challenge them and make them even more competitive." So, what I think this all kind of plays together is that Connecticut has got to recommit itself to its high-tech manufacturing and to high-quality education at all levels. So, so I just would stop with that at that point, I think, on that initial issue regarding our economy. And take some questions. Yeah.
Okay, so I will get us started. I would like to hear, Senator, what your thoughts are about what's going on the national level. The discourse, the vitriol, but also whether you think that is going to affect our General Assembly races. Particularly, I've heard a lot of concern about voter disgust and whether even Republicans are trumped out. What are your thoughts on Donald Trump and what's going on the national level?
Well, I think this is really an unprecedented kind of national election. I don't think we've ever seen, at least in my memory, a national candidate like Mr. Trump. And I think that's a good thing that we haven't seen that kind of a candidate on the national scene beforehand. But the fact that he has taken the positions he has and adopted the kind of confrontational approach that he has, and the fact that his national support seems to be declining somewhat, excuse me, especially most recently in terms of his the comments that he made about women and continues to make. I think that the impact may be that there may be some sense of depressing his turnout among his supporters. You never quite know, because the approach that he's taken, worrying about the election supposedly being rigged and stolen from him, is the sort of thing that someone only says in advance of an election when expect to lose and are looking to build a context to excuse that loss or to save face, which it seems exactly what Trump is preparing for at this point. So the message I think that he thinks he's sending is that, based upon his own ego, that there is no way that he could lose the election except if it were rigged. But I think the message that people are receiving from that is he already knows he's lost and is trying to set a context for it to make it less humiliating for him. But here in Connecticut, I think he does have some support in certain areas of the state where there are people who are strongly committed to him, regardless of anything else, and will come out. And at the same time, I think that there are people who are just appalled by him in general, and even people who are used to voting Republican, in many cases are going to be very skeptical and may not be able to bring themselves to vote for Trump. Especially, I think that's going to be true of women. Republican women, I think, in many cases are going to have a real difficulty voting for Trump. What that means also, I think, is that in certain areas of the state where Republicans have traditionally been strong, like Fairfield County, where there are a lot of educated, affluent Republican women, I think that's where his erosion of support among Republicans may be the strongest. Also, there are other factors, I think, in Connecticut at play, which are not helpful to the Republicans, namely that we have a strong and popular United States Senate candidate, Senator Blumenthal, running for re-election, and 5 strong incumbent congressional candidates. The Republican U.S. Senate candidate, State Representative Carter hasn't really made much of an impact, has not had the budget to really run an aggressive campaign. If you think about it, 6 years ago and 4 years ago, Linda McMahon spent $50 million in each of those two races. Carter was only raised about $100,000 running against Senator Blumenthal, who's raised about $7 million. And I don't think Carter has been able to penetrate with any kind of a message. Same is true with the 5 congressional challenges the Republicans have. So I think as a practical matter, that means that there is a wide-scale appeal on the Democratic line from Secretary Clinton to Senator Blumenthal, to the congressional candidates, and then to our state legislative candidates, where there's somewhat of a wasteland, I think, on the Republican line after Trump, trying to get people to think about Trump and then skip down the line to their legislative candidates who are in the 4th and 5th position on the line. So it's President, U.S. Senator, Congress, then state senators in the 4th position, and state representative in the 5th position.
Well, and thank you very much for that. And I do want to turn to the state budget at some point, but I do want to sort of play off what you just said. In terms of the state legislature, you kind of hear the GOP, they've got 4 to go, and do you think that there are weak spots in some of these Democratic strongholds? I don't want to name names, but I can name names because you kind of hear maybe a good target is Joe Crisco, the wonderful longtime senator from Woodbridge, or Dante over there in Middletown, and so are you concerned about that at all?
Well, I think we're obviously working hard with all of our incumbents. I think that all of our incumbents are strong candidates for re-election. They all have strong bases in their district. They've all been doing constituent service. Senator Crisco has been elected many times by very healthy margins over the last 24 years, and I don't see any reason to expect that it'll be different this time. Same is true with Senator Bartolomeo, who's now been elected twice in that district, having defeated Mr. Suzio twice. Senator Flexer is now in her 2nd term, has been working very hard in community service and constituent service in her district since being elected, and former Representative Bowles is working very hard in that open seat to try to succeed Senator Maynard. So I think the Republicans may have miscalculated, and that the CBIA may have miscalculated as to the vulnerability of the people they have targeted for this independent expenditure that they're making in those races. And I think, in effect, by telling us so far in advance who their targets were, it has helped us to help prepare and make sure that extra volunteers are coming in and working in those districts, and that all efforts are being redoubled to make sure those incumbents have the resources that they need to win. And frankly, I think the Republicans should be worried about some of their own incumbents. We have very strong challengers running in several districts currently held by Republicans.
Do you, before we move on to the budget, do you want to address at all to us your concern about what CBIA did?
Well, I think it is a miscalculation on their part that they decided to overtly become partisan in a way that they had not done before by agreeing to spend $415,000 in the aggregate on a number of General Assembly races. I think they said they targeted 11 House races and those 4 Senate races. I think that's a mistake on their part, because they try to present themselves as a sort of even-handed representative of business interests around the state, and I think that that position is going to be compromised by their becoming so overtly partisan.
Do you think that issue is done at this point, or do you think that there's still more to figure out about what the steps they took?
Well, I think one of the issues that arises there is to what extent they communicated with their members in advance of making the decision to spend that money, because there's at least a possibility that some of the tax-exempt nature of the people that pay in dues to CBIA could be compromised and rendered not tax-exempt when it's used for partisan political purposes. I don't know to what extent they took that into consideration when they made the decision to make these expenditures.
Okay. Anybody else before we talk about the budget?
Yeah, what about the First Five? Is that the program, First Five? The First Five. We spent tens of millions of dollars we gave to companies, and I think, rewarded us with 3,800 jobs, something like that, but they won't tell us what these jobs are. So I'm a little concerned. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and what we've gotten are 3,800 minimum wage jobs, which doesn't seem to be a good investment.
Well, I don't think they're minimum wage jobs. I think over the aggregate, we're going to see substantial hiring through the First Five and First Five Plus programs, because the effort is, again, to help businesses that intend to add at least 200 jobs as the criterion for coming in the First Five. Obviously, I think the Jackson Labs coming in here is something that is really significant, because they are already ahead of pace on the jobs that they have promised to bring to Connecticut. And in fact, those are high-paying jobs with substantial salaries that do pay, that result in the amount of salaries that people can have to own a home, pay a mortgage, and raise a family in Connecticut. So I think that's going to, in the long run, be true of most of the First Five initiatives. But in addition to that, we have the two other initiatives that we passed back in 2011 that are bearing fruit in many ways. The Business Express, Small Business Express program that provides grants and loans to small businesses that have helped several thousand businesses in the state to expand. And then also the Step Up program, which is one that provides benefits for smaller businesses hiring unemployed people, and the separate Step Up program for hiring of veterans, where the employer can have an employee's salary subsidized in part for the first 6 months of the employees being working there, and during that time the employee can prove himself or herself to be a good employee, and the risk to the employer taking on the new employee is minimized by having a subsidy during that first 6 months. So several, I think it's 2,500 to 3,000 people have been employed now through the Step Up program. So these are all initiatives that are, I think, bearing fruit and continue to do so. In addition, obviously, the new initiative that we have that we became known as was Senate Bill 1 for the 2016 session, the new concept of entrepreneurial grants that are being set up on a competitive basis around the state to encourage new growth businesses. In fact, we're having a press conference this afternoon in New Haven to announce New Haven's successful application for one of those grants. Our studies have shown, and our Finance Committee in promoting that bill this year indicated that new hiring and growth is not so much a function of established businesses and not so much as a function of small business, but of newer businesses. That newer businesses are the ones that have the potential for growth, and what we can do to nurture and develop those new businesses is the way where we can see dramatic potential for growth. And I think that's what this new concept of promoting entrepreneurship that we are talking about, what we're talking about in New Haven this afternoon, is going to be beneficial to the state for years to come.
Senator, can you, there's a couple things, I would like to hear your thoughts on what you're expecting in Connecticut for the next 2-year budget cycle, and possibly, it's up to you, your choice of whether you'd like to address, the concerns that Senator Fasano has made, number one being the demand for, some pretty significant structural change, but also for a seat at the table, so to speak.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
First of all, excuse me, Republicans in talking about this idea of structural change is, I think, really something that is a misrepresentation of everything we have done in the last 5 or 6 years, because if there's anything that we have done in the last 5 or 6 years, it is structural change, and that is the fact that we have made a commitment beginning in 2011, and I think this is to the credit of Governor Malloy and the General Assembly, to make a commitment in each year of the last several years, despite our budget challenges, to commit nearly $1 billion of additional spending each year toward our pension shortfall, toward our pension obligations. The state had one of the most underfunded state pension plans in the state, and that went on all during the years, and we had the Republican governors, Rell and Rowland, and they wanted to rely on just returns on investment of our portfolio to make up the difference of the state not making contributions. But since in the last 5 years, we have put in over $1 billion a year toward addressing those pension obligations, especially those caused by the Tier 1 employees in the system, who are the employees that have the most expensive pension plan. Now, if we had not made that commitment back in 2011, really we wouldn't have had deficits at all the last several years, because if you subtract that $1 billion a year, pretty much that's it. That pension contribution figure that we've made each of those years represents, in effect, the deficit in each of the years that we've made those contributions. So I think that's been really responsible structural planning to do that. In addition, back in 2011, as part of the budget deal that year, there was a negotiation with the state employee unions that provided for a new pension plan that all employees who've been hired after 2011 have a much less generous pension plan than those who had come in before that. So you have a gradual sort of a bending of the arc of pension costs in Connecticut. It'll be gradual, but it's going to be perceptible over time. In fact, Tier 1, which is the most expensive plan, was closed out to new employees back in 1984, and each successive pension plan after that has been less generous, and the one that was set up in 2011 was significantly less generous, and employees are making more contributions, new employees, to their health care, to their pension plans, and all of that. The other point that the Republicans keep raising is this idea of not having a seat at the table, being shut out of the process, and that is, of course, entirely a political ploy. It's an effort on their part to try to create public sympathy for a sense of grievance on their part, as if they were willing participants and looking to help solve the budget problems, and that they were shut out. Nothing is farther from the truth. The fact is that last year, during the deficit mitigation plan, they presented us with a list of, at the time as they presented it, non-negotiable demands, and if we didn't accede to all of them, they said they wouldn't participate. Now, many of those demands that they made, in one form or another, we did actually include in our budget, in our deficit mitigation plan, but in fact, because we didn't go point by point on every single issue that they talked about, they backed away from the table and said that we were unreasonable. But it's really, it's sort of the part of ploy that minority parties always use in order to create sympathy in the public, in sense that say that, hey, we were willing to collaborate and be responsible, but the majority shut us out. It's not true today. It hasn't been true. They keep saying it, but it's in some ways it's almost like the case of a sibling who tells the parents that the other sibling hit him, just to get him in trouble with the parents. So it's there's sort of that at play here. But it's never been true. It isn't true now. But they see it as a political argument that they hope to make some gain with by being the minority party and create a sense of aggrievement.
Thank you. Can you talk about what the plan is for the budget issues that Connecticut faces?
Well, in January, obviously, we will be facing and continuing budget challenges, but I think we will be doing some of what we did in the past, is continuing to look for responsible cuts to make without crippling state services to the point where those services are really impaired. Now, if you look at last year's budget, really, for the first time in 43 years, we had a significant year-to-year reduction in the general fund. I believe the last time that happened was back in 1973. Because most times when we talk about cuts, you're really talking about a reduction in the annual rate of increase. But last year it was an absolute real cut of 1.1%. The fiscal budget was lower than it was the previous year. And that required a lot of serious cuts, program cuts, obviously the layoffs of some state employees, and reductions elsewhere. The one thing that we, in the aggregate, saved from cutting, because it was a primary goal of protecting, was municipal aid, because despite the financial crisis, in the aggregate, we gave more aid to municipalities despite our budget crisis than had been the case before. And we did that in several ways. First was by taking account of the fact that in 2015, we finally grappled with the issue of the car tax, which had been a problem for years. I think it is the property tax in the whole has seen, I think, by most people as the most burdensome tax that they pay. Not any tax that's levied directly by the state, but really the local property tax is the one that in some ways makes people find the most burdensome and difficult. And 38% of local property taxes are paid by business, and of course that includes the tax on motor vehicles. So what we did by capping the tax at 37 mils statewide took account of the fact that that really was the most egregious part of the local property tax, because some might argue that real estate values are conditioned upon location, that a property on the shoreline in Madison is worth inherently more than the same physical structure located in an inner city next to two boarded up buildings, just by location being a factor in value. But a car is a car, it's the same car wherever. And the fact that a car was taxed at 11 mils in Greenwich and the same car was taxed at 74 mils in Hartford was just outrageous. And so we figured that the irony there, of course, the people in Hartford could probably much less afford to pay that high property tax than the people in Greenwich could. But anyway, that's Greenwich, with such a very healthy property tax base, they only need to tax 11 mils in order to raise as much money as they raise.
Is their tax rate is really 11 mils?
11 mils, yes, yeah.
Very robust.
A robust tax base, that's right, absolutely. So, well, New Haven was in the 40s, and Bridgeport was now over 50, Waterbury 58. So what we did by setting the cap at 37, it was a benefit to both of the taxpayers and to the towns. By what we did was we held the towns harmless by giving them a state grant for the difference between what their current mill rate brings in and what they would bring at 37 mils, so towns don't lose anything, but then the taxpayers get the benefit of not having to pay anything more than 37 mils. So that bill will provide a benefit to more than 1 million households in the state of Connecticut. Just at 37 mils, we expect it will, by lowering the mill rate a little further in years to come, will benefit even more households by that provision. At the same time, the other thing that we did was, excuse me, we took a look at the pilot program, the payment in lieu of taxes program, by which the state partially reimburses municipalities for the tax exempt status of private college and hospital property as well as the state's own property. The pilot program, I think, is a good one. It was created more than 30 years ago by the legislators who were representing New Haven at that time, were the leading advocates for it. And it took into effect, recognized that those tax exempt facilities provide a statewide benefit, and yet the host municipality bears the burden of having them there. But what was not taken into account in the formula was that not every community with tax exempt property has the same relative need for pilot payments to help compensate for that tax exempt property or other property that is tax exempt. Because if you think about it, thanks very much. In Greenwich, only 3% of the real estate in Greenwich is tax exempt. So basically 97% of their property is available to be taxed. In New Haven, 50% of the property is tax exempt. That's counting not only the pilot eligible property, that is the property owned by colleges and hospitals and the state, but all the other tax exempt property for which there is no pilot, churches and other things and nonprofits that own it. So Hartford, New Haven, New London are communities that have about 50% of their property tax exempt. Greenwich, on the other hand, has said about 3%. But under the old pilot program, the original pilot program, whatever pilot reimbursement the community would get was based upon the value of the tax exempt property within the town, without regard to the overall level of tax exempt property in the town. So that meant that Greenwich got the same level of reimbursement for property owned by Greenwich Hospital that New Haven got for the property owned by Yale New Haven Hospital, or that Hartford got for Hartford Hospital. But under the new formula, we've set up a pilot program that now sets a 3-tiered formula, whereby the 10 communities that have the most overall tax-exempt property get a higher level of pilot reimbursement. The next 25 get an intermediate level of reimbursement, and then all the rest are held harmless at the current levels of reimbursement. So we made a movement toward, I think, making the pilot formula more comprehensively relevant in addressing where real need occurs.
Is it the state or the local community that gives veterans a $1,500 benefit off the assessed value of their property? Does it come from the state or does it come?
Well, that's a municipal. The state authorizes it, but the municipality has to pass it by local statute. I think there's a state program that's required, but there's also a local option, I think, to give enhanced veterans benefit for veterans. And there's always a concern about that too, and that we'd like to be able to give them a greater benefit for veterans in terms of the amount that they can get off their taxes, their assessed value.
Right, because right now, if you buy a vehicle for $23,000, what you're going to get off the assessed value come tax time is approximately $100. That's not a benefit.
Right.
To me, it's not a benefit at all. It's kind of shocking.
Well, again, it's a municipal program in the sense that the state doesn't reimburse the municipalities for that lost revenue. That's a municipal property tax loss by having that exemption occur, right? But I agree that we should have a higher benefit, higher threshold for veterans. Although there are many other programs that we have instituted in the last few years for veterans. In addition to the separate veterans step-up program, we have created a program just last year that will provide greater benefits for veteran entrepreneurs. We have young veterans coming back who've served in the military in the last 15 years since with the Gulf Wars, starting up new businesses, and we have created a 15% veterans preference on bidding on state projects, so that the veterans will be able to have a competitive advantage in bidding on state contracts. If it's a veteran-owned business, that will be able to get a 15% preference. So veteran business would be able to bid $115 and get a bid on something that somebody else bid $100 on, if they can show that it's veteran status. So I think that's going to be a significant benefit to veterans over time, especially those that are young veterans starting up their own small businesses, startup businesses in the state.
Senator, one of the things that we hear a lot about, and I hope you didn't address it while I ran out of the room for a minute, but we hear a lot about ECA funding, both from municipal officials and from various advocacy groups, really concerned about what they perceive as being the unfair divvying up of the ECA money and the consistent lack of following the state formula. Can you give us your thoughts about that and whether you think that process needs to change, and if you can think of anything else you think that the state might be able to cut in the next biennium without hurting services and things. Can you share that with us as well?
Oh, sure. First of all, I think that Judge McAllister in his decision, made a valuable contribution to this debate by helping to highlight the need for reform in this area. However, his decision did go into areas far beyond those that he was asked to decide by the plaintiffs in the case, and I think it's appropriate that the Attorney General has decided to appeal, because if there is going to be a fundamental reform, I think, on state education funding, it needs to be a decision of the state Supreme Court, just as the Horton versus Mesco case was ultimately a mandate that comes from the Supreme Court, not from a decision of a single Superior Court judge. But in Judge McAllister's decision, he did point out that in the aggregate, he believed that the amount that the state spends on public education is not constitutionally inappropriate, but does, in his view, fail to, the distribution for it, as you said, the allocation, fails to meet a standard of what it should be. But that, of course, has been now a problem for the last 40 years, really now, since the Horton versus Mesco decision in 1977. The state has been grappling with this problem. And the original guaranteed tax base formula that was set up after that case, when the Supreme Court then directed the state to come up with some remedy to deal with the inadequacy and the inequality of some municipalities to provide a quality public education system based upon their local property tax base. So the formula that was devised at that time, and every formula since then, has had the political problem, is that even from the beginning, the formula was not fully adhered to, because in order to get the votes to pass the program, there had to be what was called a hold harmless, meaning that the wealthy communities that didn't qualify for anything under the grant had to be given a per pupil grant in order to get the votes of their legislators to actually pass a program that was going to benefit all of the communities that had need. So I don't think anything has necessarily changed in that regard, that if there was going to be a new formula, it is going to provide in some ways that more money is going to have to be raised in communities of wealth that will have to be spent in communities of poverty. And it's the same challenge that we've been facing for years, regardless of how you distribute that money. And so I think that what Judge McCasher points out and what the plaintiffs in that case pointed out is certainly true, but it does still leave us with the same challenge of whether those communities are going to be willing to spend more, and whether they're going to be willing to take a view that what benefits the whole state benefits them, or whether they're going to continue to look at it just on a town-by-town basis. Now, you asked about what other reforms might be necessary in order to try to accommodate education reform in the current constrained fiscal climate we have. And I think the fundamental thing we're going to have to look at there at some point is more regional planning in education. I think we ultimately need to have more regional school districts created in the state for efficiency purposes. That some people have said about concern about closing schools. I think that's not the direction to go in, but consolidating administrative levels is something we definitely should do, because we have too many really small school systems around the state where you have administrative layers and superintendents, deputy superintendents, curriculum administrators, and other supervisory positions supervising a very small number of schools that have their own in-house administrators, and then you have this other layer of administrators outside. And I think that is really increasingly not supportable given our state's fiscal climate, that in order for the state to continue to providing a significant amount of education funding to municipalities, there has to be some change to provide greater efficiencies in the way that money is spent by the municipalities when they receive it. Now, that really is something that's, of course, a political challenge in Connecticut, because we have 169 jealously self-protective home rule towns in the state. I know as Mayor Bronin in Hartford said recently that if Connecticut were open space right now in a wilderness and somebody were planning a new development here, nobody would plan it the way it has developed over time. Nobody would divide it into 169 separate entities and have them operate the way they do. If you think about the city of New York, with 8,000 people, has a single police force. Connecticut, with less than half the population of the city of New York alone, has, how many police forces do we have? How many fire departments do we have? How many school systems do we have? How many health districts do we have? It just points out our sort of fragmentation here that we have. And we've had one significant success in regionalization within the last few years, and that was in the consolidation of our probate court system. We used to have 117 separate probate districts in the state. And the probate district was running into some financial challenges, and a few years ago a reform was undertaken to reduce those 117 districts down to 54. And that was a very substantial consolidation, especially in all those small towns up in northeastern and northwestern Connecticut. Many of them that were single-town probate districts are now consolidated into 4 or 5 and 6 towns in a single probate district, provided for greater efficiency, better hours, better staff, and made the system more efficient. And many people thought that was not going to be achievable because all of the political interests that were going to be gored by doing that. But in effect, it did happen. The new system went into effect in 2010 and has worked quite well. And ultimately, that's the direction I think we're going to have to go in with education funding as well, in order to make sure our education dollars go further at the local level by having greater administrative efficiencies at the local level.
Well, but in the case of a probate court, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the state can accomplish on its own. And there was a whole lot of complaining about it when it went on, and there was a whole lot of complaining by residents and people who were not going to have their probate position anymore because it's an elected position. But okay, so that said, the regionalization idea, which is just a really interesting idea, wouldn't that require, like for instance, when the Amity School District formed, didn't Bethany, Orange, and Woodbridge have to agree to it?
Mhm.
And is that something that if you start pitching the idea now, that maybe you'll form a couple of them in 20 years, or you have to have sort of a massive advertising campaign to try to get, local people on board here, because you see this home rule idea, people are so married to it.
Well, I think you're right. It is a great challenge, but I think increasingly we need a so-called carrot and stick approach, meaning I think that more and more state grants need to be conditioned upon regional approval. That in some cases you won't give as much state money unless there is a regional approach to doing things. We do that to some extent now in school construction grants, because for years we have provided a greater percentage of reimbursement on school construction for magnet schools, for multi-district magnet schools, than we have for individual school construction projects town by town. So traditionally the state reimbursed school construction on about a 20 to 80% sliding scale, that the wealthiest communities got about 20% reimbursement for their school construction projects, and the poorest communities got about 80%. But in some cases, magnet schools were up to almost 100% paid for by the state. So that's a precedent for a way in which we can approach these things and provide incentives. If you want to go your own way, you can, but you're going to have to absorb the cost more yourself. Whereas if you want to continue to have state participation and state support, you're going to have to do it on a regional basis. And I think that's probably the way to help get this done as we move along.
Are there specific regions of the state that you guys are already thinking about in terms of marketing this, like you said, or
Well, I think the probate reform was looked upon, the basic sort of organizational principle was that no community with a population of under 40,000 should continue to think of itself as likely to be an independent district. So that was kind of the principle for the probate reform, that so communities over 40,000 were generally seen as being large enough to remain as single town districts, but under 40,000 you should look to consolidate with someone else. I think that's kind of at least a workable principle to apply, I think, to the school districts as well. So where there are existing regional school districts, those already are operating by agreement. I think those should be allowed to continue. But the new districts, we need to encourage a lot more districts to continue to adopt that point. We do have, as you said, several regional districts around the state that are currently in operation, and they seem to work reasonably well, except like a few years ago we had the budget battle in the Amity district where they voted 12 times before they adopted the budget. But so there are obviously problems that occur in that format too. But overall, I think the ones that currently exist could be a model for the ones that need to come into existence.
So the main goal behind that would just be to save the state more money, right?
Right, to get economies of scale in so many ways, right? I think it would save, not only would it save the state money, but it would save those individual districts money, too, in terms of not paying for as many salaries of school administrators and all of the administrative overlay that you have, right?
I know that.
Also greater efficiency in planning bus transportation, all the other things that you can make more efficient on a per capita basis if you're doing it on a larger scale.
Litchfield has a few of those regional districts.
Right, yeah.
Well, but the fact is that Amity, as an example, Bethany, Orange, and Woodbridge all have a superintendent of schools still. So you have 3 towns and 4 superintendents of schools. And I don't think that's what you're talking about in terms of...
No, I think it is, because I think in those towns, they still have their elementary schools are still individually run by the towns, but it's only for the high school that they're combined. So, I think you need to have more thoroughgoing regionalization than that, to have all the schools in a given area part of, a regional entity rather than just the high school. Yeah. Because in some areas of the state, obviously there is population loss, and some towns have seen erosion, and you have some schools in certain areas that are really not at capacity anymore, and that's obviously a sign of inefficiency where it occurs.
Even in East Haven, they had problems with dwindling attendance. remember what the high school, if it's like, something like 1,500 kids or something like that, but it only has 800 something students.
Hmm.
For me. Do you?
Well, that's part of the thing, sometimes the school construction grants are based upon projected enrollments.
Yeah.
Obviously, the amount that the state will pay for on a square footage basis is projected based on what the enrollment
Yeah,
patterns are
school
anticipated to be.
Was recently remodeled too. So
Yeah.
It's a big, pretty.
And sometimes the enrollments don't reach projected levels, Yeah, so there was a case a few years ago where the states have actually tried to come back to the municipalities and recapture money where they said that they overspent on a building. But, in those cases, as long as the good faith projections were made at the time, I think that if the projections turn out not to be valid later on, it isn't fair to penalize the towns for what was a good faith projection at the time it was made. In terms of overbuilding.
Is there a school region you can use as an example for consolidation? I think Region 12, is it, has Deep River, Chester, and I think they have about 6 towns there.
I think so. I think that may be the large one in terms of the most, the largest number of towns in a regional district. Yeah.
And are they a model, or are they, because that's been around for quite a while. I know when I was a reporter back in 2000.
Yeah, it has. I'm not sure whether they are like Amity in terms of still having some schools locally controlled, or whether they're all regional or not. Whether it's, as I said, the Amity district is the high school is supported by all 3 towns, but the K-6, I think, are still individual. So, we would need to look at it, and from kindergarten on would all have to be part of the regional approach, I think.
Do you know by any chance, how many regional school districts there are in the state?
I'm not sure. I think there are.
There might be a few.
Yeah.
There's up to Region
It's about
15.
Yeah.
And those encompassing like as many as 1 to 4 or 5 towns? Is there like a minimum?
I don't know, I'd have to look it up.
Yeah, is there a
There's no
minimum?
point to have a regional district with one. I think that.
Yeah, so I think there are 120 something, I forget the number, but I think there are 120 something separate school districts in the state, maybe more. So that means there are probably 40 or 50 towns that are already in regional districts, maybe. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about something very specific you might propose the state do budget-wise? Since we're facing this, $1.4 billion deficits, what else can we lose, or what else can we change to save some of that
Because
money?
I've been talking to a lot of the other candidates, and other things I've asked them is, where do you want to cut, where do you want to scale back, what things do you want to continue funding? You kind of touched upon it a little bit, about as far as services that the state will keep funding. Where have you found any that you think might be possible, or you might start making cuts?
Well, I think that one area that we continue to have to do what we did this year is to go painstakingly through the budget and find savings wherever we can, as we did find that 1% cut this year. I think we do need to prioritize municipal aid. There's also, I think, concern if we cut more from higher ed, because obviously we want to continue to promote UConn and the Board of Regents schools, because higher ed is Connecticut's economic edge, that we want to continue to have a highly skilled, highly educated population. So to the extent that we undercut higher ed, we're undermining our own future objectives. One of the things I think, obviously we'll have to look back again, is negotiations with the state employees. Hopefully, and back in 2011, when we had a deficit, we had 3 approaches that year when they had the big deficit that was faced when Governor Malloy first came into office, a $3.5 billion deficit over that biennium. And there were 3 components to what we did to address it. There was a tax increase that year. There were very significant cuts that were made, but there was also the state employee package, where they negotiated some reductions in benefits and negotiated the new pension plan for new employees, and other savings in terms of medical plan copays, things like that. So, we need to find, I think, across the board savings. We'll have to, the administration will have to approach the state employees once again on that. And I think, one of the things that the Republicans have talked about in the past about, mandating savings from the state employees. Well, many of these things, these are contractual benefits that have to be negotiated for, and I believe that the Malloy administration is and will continue to negotiate in these areas to try to find savings. But it isn't something that you can can just snap your fingers and do because you'll be abrogating a contract. But we continue to have to look in those areas, I think, for savings wherever we possibly can. That's got to be a major one.
Okay, thanks. Anything else, anybody? No? Anything we missed, Senator, or that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I think one of the things that we will be looking at again is the issue of trying to continue with our criminal justice reform programs. One of the great challenges we had in our state, as in many other states, is that the correction system over the years became a much bigger portion of our state budget than it had been because of the fact of longer sentences, mandatory minimums, and the push for very harsh sentencing that went on beginning of the 1980s. And it was so dramatic that our prison population went from 6,000 people in 1980 to 19,000 by 2007. And so the prison population in the state tripled at a time when our state population really didn't grow at all. It was basically flat during those the period of years. And we have had great success in the last several years whittling that down. I think now it's down around 15,000 or below 15,000, especially through the measure of decriminalizing some of the possession cases of small amounts of marijuana and things of that nature. And a lot of those minor cases are now out of the correction system where people are not being incarcerated for them before, and freed up the dockets for aggressive pursuit of more serious cases. So I think we need to continue moving in that regard. One of the things I think is clearly going to be an issue on the table next year is the legalization of marijuana more broadly for recreational uses. It's a ballot question this year in the state of Massachusetts. Now, we adopted a provision when we first decriminalized the possession of small amounts of marijuana a few years ago. It was after marijuana had adopted that by a ballot question. So when we saw it passed in Massachusetts, Senator Harp and I, then Senator Harp, now Mayor Harp and I, introduced the bill in Connecticut the following year, reasoning that public opinion in Connecticut was probably not all that different than it was in Massachusetts. And the first year, we just had a public hearing on the bill, and the Judiciary Committee didn't go any further. That was in 2010. But the next year, when Governor Malloy embraced it, the bill went all the way through the process and became law to place some of those offenses into the category of an infraction rather than a crime. In other words, they weren't made entirely legal, but they were decriminalized in the sense that the penalty that attached to them was an infraction offense rather than one that carried a criminal penalty. And that, I think, really began the process of helping to reduce the scaling back many of these cases from the criminal justice system. So I think if the referendum passes in Massachusetts, that will give additional impetus to possibly having the issue brought forward in Connecticut, and frankly, it is a potential significant revenue raiser for us too. If you look at the Colorado model, if you scale that to Connecticut, there's an estimate that it could be worth as much as $60 million a year in revenue to Connecticut. So obviously, in times that are constrained, that's something we would obviously look at for the financial reason alone.
What are you hearing from Massachusetts? Is it a go?
Obviously there's a lot of activity on both sides, both lobbying for and against. So I don't know whether anybody's done any polling as to whether it's likely to pass or not yet, but that's why, across the border we'll be looking at it pretty closely here, I think.
And do you support it?
I do.
You do?
Yes.
Senator, have you, just to go back to the idea about pushing for more regional schools, is that something you brought up before, or is that?
Well, yes. In general, when Speaker Sharkey and I had worked on a number of regionalization initiatives. We also one of the initiatives that we passed last year, in addition to the providing the change in pilot to recognize need, and also the car tax, there was another component of using sales tax revenue for municipal aid, and that was for the benefit of towns that would not see a benefit out of the car tax because their mill rate is below 37, or not see much benefit out of the pilot because they don't have that much tax-exempt property. So there was another part of that initiative that also provided a benefit to all communities, a distribution of sales tax revenue based on 0.5% of the sales tax. But a portion of that money was being set aside to encourage regional cooperation, and and the agreement by regional bodies and local councils of government to find projects that they could cooperate on together and to use that portion of that money to enhance those projects. So I think we need to look at that more and more to try to find ways, but there would be voluntary regional cooperation to do. Obviously, that's again stymied by the fact that we don't have any regional structures in place to promote that. Like the state of Minnesota for years has had a system that was a model, the system where they have had around the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, where all the counties in that area have had a plan where any new economic development that occurs in any town within that region, a portion of the new taxes get put into a pool that all of the communities in that region draw upon, whether or not it's the one that actually got the new entity or not. And that's been one of our problems in Connecticut, is that you have neighboring communities often jealously battling each other for a new mall or for a new factory or for something else, and someone is a winner and everyone else is a loser when the decision is finally made. But in Minnesota, everyone's a winner, that regardless of which community the new facility is located in, there's a sharing of some of the benefit of it to the neighboring communities. So what that has allowed for better regional planning, regional growth, and in Connecticut, one of the things that's always bothered me is that when you see a small incubator business in Science Park, for instance, in New Haven, being nurtured along there, and all of a sudden they hit a major patent, and all of a sudden they're successful. First thing they do is move out of New Haven to a place with a larger campus, and now there's no residual benefit to New Haven for all the nurturing years that they spent here. Well, that seems to me, if you had more of a regional system, New Haven would continue to get some residual benefit out of that entity, even if it moved to Branford or somewhere else. We're seeing it now with Alexion will be back into New Haven, which is great because they come back from Cheshire, and now they are expanding in New Haven. But I think that where businesses start to, as incubator businesses in an urban area and then move to a suburban campus, there ought to be some continuing sense of mutual sharing of the benefit of the later development of something that was a startup in an inner city.
I have one other quick question, and I know time is getting short, but if Connecticut did legalize recreational use of marijuana, what would that look like? Would we have farms? Would we have? Yes. I know we have medical marijuana, and most of that's greenhouses.
Yeah, that's controlled,
and
obviously for that, right?
So,
yeah.
Is that something that not only, because pot is taxed now, just nobody pays it.
Right,
How do you go about paying a tax on something you're not
You're committed a crime if you go pay the tax, right?
But, so is there some, obviously, if it's taxed, are there job benefits here? Are there, entrepreneurial benefits?
Well, I think we'd look at Colorado and the other states that have done it so far, mostly on the West Coast, and see how they've managed the implementation of it, I think, and try to pick the best model. And to see how that works, right? Just as we did with the medical marijuana, but I think obviously it is something that there could be a substantial revenue benefit to the state by doing it. I heard Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado was on the radio yesterday talking about it, in his state, and he said that there was concern that there was going to be a surge in new young people smoking marijuana or using more of it, and that it was going to be a public health hazard in Colorado. And he said that hasn't really been their experience to this point, anyway. And I think that one of the major arguments against it, I think that's probably the argument that many people will make, is the fact that while we have this opioid crisis, that we shouldn't be going about legalizing another product. But the two issues are really distinct, and some argue that marijuana is a gateway drug to other things. But increasingly, studies have shown that the people who are getting into trouble with more dangerous drugs like cocaine and heroin are actually people that began with painkillers and other opioids rather than marijuana, and it is really prescription painkillers that are the ones that have become the real gateway drugs. People begin taking them for a legitimate medical use, and then all of a sudden develop an addiction that leads to other things. And in fact, we did pass a law this year that deals with that physicians are now going to be limited to providing 7-day prescriptions when they're providing those painkillers, and that will be renewed. So we don't want to have too many pills casually prescribed that are going to be maybe circulating out there, being taken by people other than the ones they were prescribed for.
If we legalize marijuana, what are we going to do with all these men we put in jail for selling it?
Well, I think that,
We've got a lot of men in jail for selling marijuana.
Absolutely.
That we're allowing other people to sell under the guise of medical.
Right.
So what are we gonna do with all these people who are in jail because they sold marijuana?
Well, many of them, I think, will be coming out fairly soon. If that was their only crime, they should be out fairly soon. Obviously, that is obviously prison should be, as it has been in the past few years, I think, the priority for prison space should be given to those who have committed violent offenses and really are a danger to the public. And, again, this is something some of the Republicans have tried to use in arguing against some of the criminal justice reforms. And one of the Republican independent expenditures done by First Selectman Herbst in attacking some of our members have used this sort of attack about people letting murderers loose on the streets. But the reality is that people who have committed violent crimes are actually serving, in many cases, a greater portion of their sentences than they were before, because obviously there is more space in the prisons now for people who are dangerous. They're being kept there longer. They are serving, in many cases, 85% or more of their sentence time. And that's where prison is appropriate for those who really are a danger and a menace to society, rather than those whose offenses who are, not the kind of thing to put people in fear of their lives as they walk down the street.
All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We very much appreciate your
Oh,
time.
well, thank you. And I don't know if you're going to do an election profile piece on me or not, but I am running unopposed this year. But I'm very grateful for the support of my constituents and the nomination. I'm running an active campaign, even though I don't have an opponent, because I think I owe that to the voters to campaign vigorously and to let them know that I appreciate their confidence and look forward to continuing to serve.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Good. Thank you.
Very appreciate it.
Thank you.